Some rebellions don't start with fireworks. Some start with a finger hovering over a tiny blue sign-up button and a woman realizing she wants something that belongs to her for once. I didn't know it then, but that click, that tiny, foolish, defiant click, would one day become the weapon that saved me. But before the weapon came the hiding. Picture this. Ethan yelling at the TV while a game blared through the walls, and me sitting on the edge of our bed, door cracked just enough to let the noise drown out the soft German words I whispered into my phone. 15 minutes at first. Then 50. Then an hour. My notebook stayed tucked under a stack of spare blankets. The same blankets Ethan refused to donate because he liked having options. Each night, when he watched sports and shouted at referees who couldn't hear him, I traced new vocabulary with shaky hands. And every time the app told me, "Great job," something inside me sparked like a match-catching flame. It felt wrong to enjoy it. It felt dangerous to enjoy it. But God, it felt good. I didn't tell Ethan. Not because I was planning some grand secret, but because I could already see the look he'd give me. That tight-lipped smile that wasn't a smile at all. The sigh. The eye roll. The lecture. I could hear it so clearly, it almost echoed. "What's the point, Lydia? You won't stick with it. It doesn't help us. You're wasting time." So I kept it tucked away, like a guilty pleasure. My quiet rebellion. My small pocket of air in a life where I was always holding my breath. Now here's the twist, the part one didn't see coming. The very next morning, before I even finished brewing coffee, Ethan walked into the bedroom holding his phone like he'd just discovered a gold mine. "We're seeing this tomorrow," he said, turning the screen toward me. A condo, owned by a German man. The irony could have flattened me. He didn't ask what I thought. Of course he didn't. He just declared it, the way he declared everything. Fast forward to the building lobby. Polished floors, soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, that expensive smell of fresh coffee and cold air. Ethan walked like he owned the place, shoulders squared, chin lifted, the king of someone else's kingdom. I walked behind him, purse clutched tight to my ribs, reminding myself of the plan. Say nothing. Understand nothing. Just listen. Because I needed to know how he sounded when he believed I wasn't part of the conversation. Hans, tall, calm, effortlessly warm, opened the condo door with a smile that made me feel seen for half a second. He apologized for the mess, which was laughable because the place looked like a catalog spread. And then it happened. Ethan switched to German so fast my pulse jumped. I pretended not to follow a thing. He translated the tour into English for me, except he didn't. Not really. Hans said the management was excellent. Ethan told me it was fine, nothing special. Hans said the neighbors were professors and doctors. Ethan said, just average people. And then he started adding things, comments Hans never said, reshaping the truth to fit his script. It was like watching a magician perform a trick I'd already learned the secret to. And God, the condo was beautiful. Sun pouring through wide windows. Light bouncing off smooth wooden floors. A kitchen with marble counters that made me imagine a version of myself I hadn't met yet. A woman who cooked because she wanted to, not because she had to keep the peace. "I really like it," I whispered, almost afraid to want something out loud. Ethan didn't even look at me. Just gave a fast nod, the kind men give when they're petting a dog that won't stop begging. Then he turned back to Hans. Back to the language he thought I couldn't understand. Back to the version of Ethan that spoke freely. Because he believed I wasn't listening. If only he knew. If only he knew what was coming. Some betrayals arrive quiet as a breath. Others hit you so hard you feel the ground tilt beneath your feet. I didn't fall to the floor that day in Hans's condo. But something in me did. Not when we first walked through the bright rooms. Not when Ethan cut off Hans's warm explanations like they were background noise. Not even when he accepted coffee on my behalf without glancing in my direction. The breaking happened a few minutes later, in a single sentence, spoken softly, confidently, carelessly in a language Ethan believed I couldn't understand. But before that moment detonated everything, we were still walking through the condo room by room, Ethan and Hans talking like old friends, and me drifting behind them like scenery. It almost looked normal. Almost. because inside me, something deeper was stirring. It wasn't just admiration for the place, though the bright windows and clean lines felt like a life I didn't know I was starving for. No, it was a kind of quiet recognition. This wasn't a real estate viewing. This was the beginning of a truth that had nowhere left to hide. We circled back into the living room. Hans offered coffee, polite, warm, the kind of host who genuinely wanted you to feel at home. Ethan didn't even let me speak. He accepted instantly, the way men do when they're so used to speaking for two that they forget the second person has a voice. I sat on the edge of the sofa, hands knotted in my lap, feeling my pulse thump against my throat. I listened to Hans, really listened as he talked about his years living here, about returning to his family in Germany, about wanting someone to take care of the home he had loved. Ethan translated none of it. To me, he offered clipped fragments, stripped of warmth and meaning, like he was passing along scraps. Then the conversation shifted. Paperwork, ownership, logistics. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his tone sharp and businesslike. He was in his element. He liked feeling like the smartest man in the room. Hans explained a simple option, something many couples did. Sometimes the property was registered under one spouse first to make administrative work easier. A normal practice. Nothing shady. But then Hans asked Ethan directly whether he wanted to consider that option. And Ethan, my husband of 15 years, leaned back in his chair, lowered his voice, and delivered the sentence that carved my world in two. She doesn't need to know. She doesn't understand anything anyway. I'm the one paying. I'm the one deciding. It's none of her concern. None of her concern. The words sliced so cleanly, I didn't feel the pain right away. Just numbness. Cold, creeping numbness. My fingers trembled around the warm cup. The room blurred at the edges. Not my home. Not my future. Not my life. I stared fixedly at the wooden floor, feeling everything I had tried to preserve collapse thread by painful thread. Ethan kept talking, relaxed, careless, completely unaware that the woman sitting inches away was quietly breaking. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was grief, heavy, crushing, merciless grief for all the years I had believed I just needed to try harder. Be softer. Be more patient. Be less to me. But the truth was simple. My voice had never mattered to him. Once you hear something like that, you can never unhear it. The drive home felt surreal. Ethan hummed along to a pop song, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, satisfied with the day like it had gone exactly according to his blueprint. Meanwhile, I stared out the window, replaying the words until they formed a knot so tight I could barely breathe. When we stepped inside the house, he went straight to the sofa. The TV clicked on, loud, consuming, familiar. I stood in the hallway gripping my purse strap like it was the only thing anchoring me to the floor. Normally, I would have waited. Hours. Days. I would have softened my voice, timed my approach, avoided his irritation like someone walking barefoot through shattered glass. But something in me refused silence. I stepped into the living room. "We need to talk," I said. He didn't look up at first, just sighed, long and dramatic, the way he did when an ad interrupted his game. "Can it wait, Lydia?" I just sat down. "No," I said, and my own voice startled me. He turned, eyebrows drawn, thrown off by the firmness. I didn't hesitate. I asked him whose name he planned to put on the deed. He blinked, confused, like he hadn't expected the quiet wife to cross that invisible line he'd drawn years ago. Then he straightened, shrugged, and said it. The answer he assumed I would swallow like always. Of course it would be in my name. Why wouldn't it? Some truths don't shatter you when you hear them. They shatter you when you finally say them out loud. And that's exactly what happened the moment I told Ethan I understood every single word he'd said in German. He'd been pacing the living room like a man preparing for a victory lap. Then he froze mid-step. It was almost strange, watching the color drain from his face, watching his confidence flicker like a dying light bulb. For a split second, I wondered if he actually believed his own lie when he said, "It would be in both of our names." Like he'd rehearsed this lie for so long he mistook it for the truth. But I didn't let him hide. I repeated his exact words, in his exact language. The betrayal was the point, not the translation. He stood up slowly, face tightening as he asked, "You understand German? Since when?" As if the timeline mattered more than the knife he'd planted in my back. He launched into familiar, exhausting defenses. How he provided, how he handled the real decisions, how he understood the world better, how I was being dramatic. He threw every script he'd ever used to shrink me, but none of them sank in this time. For the first time in our marriage, his words hit something solid. A wall. My wall. When I told him I didn't trust him anymore, I watched something crack behind his eyes. Like my defiance was the real crime. Like his betrayal was forgivable, but my voice, finally rising after years of silence, was not. The room went painfully still after that. Ethan stood by the window, hands on his hips, breathing hard, acting like he was the one who'd been wounded. I sat on a dining chair, staring at the floor, feeling the very last threads of our marriage slip out of my reach. "So what now, Lydia?" he snapped. "You want to punish me for something you misunderstood?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "I understood you perfectly," I said. "You plan to take control of everything and leave me with nothing." He scoffed, circling the room like a frustrated coach. "You always think the worst." I was simplifying the process. We'd fix it later. But he had no explanation for why he told a stranger I wasn't worth including. No explanation for why he spoke about me like a child behind my back. I told him, calmly, that I couldn't live like this anymore. That's when he really broke. His face tightened, almost fearful, but angry too. "So what? You threatening me with divorce now?" "No," I said. "I'm telling you I can't stay in a marriage where my voice means nothing." The silence that followed felt like a door slamming between us long before he actually picked up his keys. He muttered something bitter under his breath as he shoved on his jacket. Said he needed space. Said he'd go stay with his friend Jamal. He said it with the swagger of a man who is sure I'd crumble without him. Sure I'd apologize. Beg. Shrink again. The front door slammed so hard the walls shook. But the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was honest. I walked to the bedroom, sat on the floor, and cried. Not for him, not for our marriage, but for the years I'd disappeared inside myself, trying to keep the peace in a war he kept creating. And under the grief, something new stirred. Small, steady, unfamiliar. Relief. And courage, quiet, but real. The next morning, my eyes were swollen, my mind racing, but my hands were steady as I held my coffee cup. Ethan hadn't come home. For once, I didn't care where he was. Instead, I stared at my phone. There was a decision sitting on my chest. I needed to call Hans. My fingers shook as I tapped the number he'd given us. What would he think? Would he tell me I misunderstood? Would he brush it off? But when he answered, his voice came warm, patient. The same calm sincerity he used in that condo. The sincerity Ethan had tried so hard to hide from me. I didn't know hope could sound like a stranger saying my name. Funny how the first person to speak to me like I mattered wasn't my husband. But that comes later. Because before there was hope, there was the silence. The kind that hangs in the air after someone decides you don't deserve a voice. It was the silence I carried with me when I made the call the next morning, hands shaking over a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I even tasted it. "This is Lydia Collins," I said, my throat tight. "We viewed your condo yesterday." For a moment, there was nothing but the faint hum of my refrigerator and my heartbeat thumping hard against my ribs. Then he spoke, calm and certain, like he already knew. "You speak German." The words didn't feel like a question. They felt like someone turning on a light inside a room I'd been sitting in blind. "Yes," I whispered back. I heard everything. I expected judgment, pity, awkwardness. What I got was a long, slow exhale, like he'd been waiting for me to admit it. "I thought so," Hans said gently. "You were very quiet. Too quiet. I suspected you understood more than your husband realized." And right then, something cracked inside me. Not in a painful way, more like a shell breaking open. I rushed to apologize, my voice stumbling over itself. I told him we wouldn't be buying the condo. I said I was sorry for wasting his time. But he cut me off, soft but firm. Lydia, don't apologize. No one had said that to me in years. Yesterday reminded me of something I went through with my daughter, he continued. She was married to a man who decided everything for her. She left him and built a much better life. His voice shifted, lower, older, honest. When I saw you sitting there, silent, I saw her. I saw that same pain. I didn't mean to, but I closed my eyes. Because for the first time since Ethan's betrayal spilled into the open, someone saw me. Not the role I played, not the woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace, not the wife who shrank so he could feel large.
Me.
I want to help you, Hans said. If you still want the condo, I can lower the price. And I can wait. Take all the time you need. I almost dropped the phone.
Why?
I breathed. Why would you do that for me? Because no woman should feel small in her own home, he said. And everyone deserves a fair chance to start over. There it was. Hope. Thin and trembling, but alive. The days after that blurred together. Coffee gone cold, nights spent awake staring at the ceiling, afternoons pacing the apartment like a guest instead of a wife. Every corner felt unfamiliar, like I was seeing it all from the outside for the first time. And Ethan? He returned 5 days later. Not with apologies. Not with explanations. Not with remorse. Just silence. He slept on the couch with his arm flung over his eyes, like the room offended him. He left early, came home late, and moved around the apartment like a man avoiding his own reflection. There was a time that coldness would have swallowed me whole. Now it only confirmed the truth. We were done pretending. While he drifted like a ghost, I sat at the kitchen table every night under that buzzing fluorescent light, studying divorce laws, mortgage terms, bank requirements, and forum posts written by women who had walked through fire and come out steel. I learned I could legally claim half of our condo. I learned my steady work history made me eligible for a mortgage. I learned fear and freedom feel identical at first. They both make your hands shake. Then, as if the universe wanted to see what I'd do next, I found it. A job posting. International company. Accounting specialist. German required. My heart punched my ribs. I applied before I could talk myself out of it. The interview came fast, too fast, but I walked into that room with my shoulders squared and spoke in the language I'd been told was unnecessary, too much, not useful. The hiring manager smiled halfway through. Impressive, she said. We need people like you. A week later, I got the job. Higher pay, better benefits. A door of my own, finally. And while the divorce moved forward, slow, bureaucratic, heavy, something in me began to rise from the rubble. Ethan offered to buy out my share. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't ask for time to think. I already knew. I already saw the new life forming at the edge of everything I once feared. The life I was finally choosing. Not the one he designed for me. Not the one I tried to fit inside. The one that belonged to me, fully and honestly. The one I was walking toward, even if my hands still trembled. I didn't know freedom could fit into a thin white envelope, until the day I held the check that proved I could survive without him. But that's the end of the story. Let me take you back to the moment everything shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, painfully quiet. The kind of quiet where a woman finally sees her life from the outside and whispers, I want more than this. When Ethan and I signed the papers to split the condo, we didn't argue. For the first time in years, we agreed on something. Practical, he called it. Efficient. Predictable. But when that transfer cleared, when the check warmed in my hands, something inside me settled, like gravity finding new ground. Security. Independence. The first real piece of my own life. And just like that, the world stopped feeling like his stage. My new job swallowed my days in the best way. Morning coffee tasted different, stronger, warmer. My inbox filled with messages from Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands. I spoke a language I used to hide, fluently, confidently, without lowering my voice. Every spreadsheet I mastered felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had buried under someone else's comfort. Hans kept his promise. He waited, patiently, kindly, while I finalized the divorce and gathered my paperwork. When the bank approved my mortgage, I signed the documents with hands that shook, not from fear, but from pride. The keys slid across the table. Cold metal. Warm future. My future. Around the same time, I enrolled in an evening certification course, a small step for most, but a mountain for someone who had spent years asking permission just to breathe. On my third class, a man sat down beside me. Tall. Steady eyes. A smile that didn't demand anything from me. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. "No," I said. "Go ahead." His name was Julian Brooks. Divorced. Starting over. Learning life the same way I was, one chapter at a time. He listened when he spoke. Really listened. Not with impatience, not with interruptions. His presence wasn't a storm. It was a Sunday morning, quiet, warm, familiar. We shared notes. Walked to the parking lot together. Studied. Laughed. Built something small and soft between the lines of two rebuilding lives. And he never rushed me. Never pushed. Never made me feel like I had to shrink myself to fit beside him. It took a whole year before I realized how far I'd traveled from the woman who once sat silently at a dining table fearing the next argument. One evening, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my condo, the one I earned, chose, and filled with things that felt like me. The river shimmered outside. The city buzzed below. And my home, was warm, safe, quiet. Julian knocked softly. He always knocked softly. We sat on the balcony as the sky melted into gold. 2 glasses of wine, legs tucked under us, a soft breeze brushing past. He reached out, not to guide me, not to restrain me, but to connect. "I'm glad our paths crossed," he said softly. "Me too," I answered. This time, my voice didn't tremble. When he left, I walked through my home slowly, touching the back of a chair I chose myself, running my hand across the counter where I made my own decisions now. For years I convinced myself silence was safer than speaking. But silence doesn't protect you. It erases you. The moment I chose myself, really chose myself, everything changed. A job that valued my mind. A home built on my decisions. A circle of people who respected me. A future shaped by my voice, not someone else's. And the version of myself I thought I'd lost forever? She was waiting for me the whole time. If any part of my story feels like yours, remember this. You are not stuck. You are not powerless. And it is never too late to start again. Sometimes the life you deserve is waiting just outside the door you're scared to open. And if you want to know what happened next, what became of Ethan, how my life shifted again, and the twist I never saw coming, tell me, and I'll share the next chapter.